This episode of EMS One-Stop is brought to you by Lexipol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's Lexipol.com.
Hi, this is Dave Williams, and I want to tell you about a master's level course for EMS and fire chiefs that Mike Taigman and I are leading starting this fall. Mike and I are old paramedics. That's Mike on the left in Denver, and that's me on the right during my training before I made my way to Austin. We go way back to the 1900s. We've been friends and collaborators for more than 25 years and are always trying to help leaders like you improve EMS systems and outcomes for patients. In addition to former medics, we're experts on emergency services, and we're trained and experienced improvement advisors. A lot has changed in how emergency services approach quality. Leaders now realize better results come from changing systems and not auditing compliance or counseling individual people. Today, the National Association of EMS Physicians has trained hundreds of leaders on the fundamentals of improvement science. That's me and Mike standing behind some of the volunteer NAMSP faculty. Still, EMS has a bold agenda, and a lot has shifted since our communities built their EMS systems in the 1970s. We know EMS makes an impact in many areas, including trauma and cardiac arrest. There remains a lot of variation in outcomes and big gaps between what we know is possible and the norm. When we look over time, EMS as a profession is struggling to close the gap and reach best practice performance. The journey to improve is long for those brave enough to try. Mike and I want to help EMS leaders like you become great at improving and achieving results that matter for your community and your patients. That's why we developed Next Level Improvement Science for EMS leaders, a year-long advanced course to develop your ability to do results-driven improvement and become the go-to problem solvers in your service. Applications are open now. I promise you this learning experience will be like no other, and your investment will bring many returns to you and your community.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of EMS One-Stop. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence, and as many of you know, my favorite four-letter word is data. And it's also a favorite four-letter word shared by many of the colleagues that we have on the show. And of course, two of the best data gurus in the business are Mike Taigman and Dr. Dave Williams. And they have a new master's level course out that equips EMS and fire leaders with advanced improvement science skills. And both Dave and Mike have been previous guests on the EMS One-Stop, but I'm excited to learn about this new course, all about it, what we're going to learn from it, of course, the massive takeaways from each section of that. And to help me do that, of course, is my guest of the day, which is Dr. Dave Williams. Dave, how are you?
I'm good, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So in terms of a new course, which is exciting, and if it involves you and Taigman, and of course the sponsors that are helping you, which is ESO and First Watch, again, an absolute data powerhouse coming together. What's the plan? What's the purpose?
Well, I appreciate it. We're pretty excited about this program. This was an idea actually that Mike and I hatched back when we were at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement's National Forum on Quality and Safety. And we were talking about how exciting it was that the ambulance space was beginning to appreciate the science of improvement at a level that we hadn't seen in our decades of time in the profession. We had been talking about the exciting work that had been done by the National Association of EMS Physicians year-long course and the number of posters that were coming out and the real kind of will and enthusiasm. And at the same time, we were talking about the fact that we were seeing that EMS was at a turning point where things were shifting and people were having a hard time efficiently either figuring out how to do change or how to make change. And we were reflecting on how do we transfer what's being done in healthcare, what's being done in education, and kind of bring a higher level of understanding about the science of improvement to the ambulance space. And so we hatched this idea: what if we created a program that mirrored the sort of the rigor and the methods that are being taught to healthcare leaders all over the world, and created that in a way that was accessible for C-suite chiefs and leaders in the ambulance space. And so we created this program. Mike obviously is a leader at First Watch, so they were very quick to want to get involved because they work with leaders who are trying to use their data to try to change performance. We're also I'm based in Austin, Texas, and I reached out to Dr. Remley Crow and colleagues at ESO, which is another organization that is really focused on trying to help leaders to figure out how to use information and data to make change. And together we hatched a plan, and we said, let's create a master's level program that builds on the shoulders of what any NAMSP is doing with the year-long course, but takes it to the next level. And let's begin to create this capability and capacity to do results-driven improvement with leaders in the ambulance space. And that's where we are. So we've got this program that's out there. Applications are open, and we're really excited about it.
So now you have a real powerhouse, because not only you two, you name dropped Remley Crow as well, a frequent visitor to the podcast too. Now, of course, I think we're getting there with data generally, and it's a very big generalization. EMS organizations have quality functions, yet few, and of course, they're looking to show how things are improving over time. I learned that from you, Dave, that when does a trend become a trend? I still go back to those days, and of course the days of creating Mr. Potato Head. If you've done a Dave course, you'll remember that one. But yet few organizations can show meaningful improvement. So why is there a gap between we're intending to do well and we're measuring and we're hoping to act on the measurements, but we don't seem to be making improvement? Is there a reason for that?
Well, so there's a couple things that you just said that were useful. So in the ambulance space, I mentioned that it's changed dramatically. Now, Mike and I go back 25 years. And one of the things that Mike did for me professionally is he introduced me to the science of improvement and the Institute for Healthcare Improvement back in the 1900s. And it was partially because of taking a quality class when I was doing my graduate work at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and working with Mike, that I ended up becoming the chief quality officer for Austin EMS. This was back right at the turn of the century. Like you described, my early experience in ambulance service was very similar to what had been the norm, which was that quality, or you mentioned a quality function, meant that there was some person, usually not somebody who's part of the C-suite leadership team, who has a designation for quality, and they do a series of activities or functions in it. That has expanded and gotten a little bit better, but to be honest, one thing that makes the ambulance service space or the EMS space different from, say, our healthcare colleagues is that quality remains a function. It's not the way in which the leadership team operates and figures out how to both design, improve, and sustain operations in clinical care. It tends to be a function. It's an individual. It's somebody who's doing things like auditing or collecting data or providing individual counsel to providers that are outside of compliance. It's not yet reached the level that it's the method in which the leadership team approaches designing and executing and getting results in the system. And that's a major difference. So when I teach at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, or when I teach with my clients in healthcare, I'm teaching senior leaders, and I'm teaching them about how to use the tools and methods and the theories of the science of improvement for everything, all their leadership and management. So we're doing quality as an organizational strategy. We're doing it across the organization. When I developed the Chief Quality Officer program at IHI, that was part of the deal. Was there was a designated leader in the C-suite now who was charged with expanding the capacity and capability to do improvement, but those activities and the application of things like using measurement data really well spread across everybody. And so that's one of the things that Mike and I are trying to bring into this course. You mentioned some of the people that I was name dropping. Well, many of the applicants that are coming into our program, including Dr. Remley Crow and Dr. Maya Dorset, are applicants into this program. So they are folks that have been leading improvement in ambulance service, haven't been able to access higher level master's level program in improvement science, and so they'll be part of the cohort that we're going to have as we take this program, to a higher level of thinking on the science of improvement and adapting it to the ambulance space.
You get double points now because you just mentioned my medical director, Dr. Maya Dorset, as well. So
yeah.
Kudos to her. Fantastic. A little sort of war story, if I may, that a long time ago, you helped us out with a fleet survey and a fleet study. And we started to look at what I called from my old Army days, mean time between failures. In other words, working out when vehicles go off the road and how long we lose them for, in order to inform our fleet strategy, right? And so this, when I think about it now, it's probably obvious, but actually to prove it in data was quite key, that it wasn't the oldest vehicles that were failing all the time. It was the mid-range fleet that had a certain engine specification that were giving us more downtime than anything else. And actually, so when we came into the fleet discussion and had to go to the board of supervisor or our board to say we want to swap out some vehicles, but they're not necessarily the oldest ones, they're actually the worst ones, and here's why. And actually, it helped us identify that, and it helped us extract the evidence. And actually, I spent a lot of time, as you know, Dave, and as people listen, though, talking about politics.
Yeah.
And when you walk into a politician's office, having the hard fact and the numbers is absolutely key, not only up on Capitol Hill, but also in your own boardroom and also in your own board of supervisors, by saying, here's the evidence and here's why we want to do something that appears to be slightly different, but actually in data and in logic makes absolute sense. And so for me, that was one of those sort of aha moments that we had. And, thank you for doing that. So how do you see quality as a leadership strategy? I mean, you've already sort of started to answer this question. And of course, again, you and I and many people I know that will listen come from that sort of quality as a strategy background. But right now, both operationally, financially, politically, it has to be a leadership strategy.
Well, so if you think about organizations, you've been on the leadership team of several organizations. Your job is to produce results, right? So as a leadership team, in order to produce results, you got to create the systems and processes that are built to get the outcomes that you want. And then you got to help work with your staff and people to be able to work within those systems and processes to get those results, right? So it's a leadership team function. Like getting results and quality is a leadership team function. Now, many other people are involved in the execution of that, but it's your job to get results. And we always talk about the buck stops here, right? Theoretically. So the best way to create good outcomes is to figure out, do I have a system that's getting there, and how do I make that happen? Now, one of the things when I'm working with leaders in any area is actually to get them to focus in on what are the core things that are really important to getting the outcomes that you need for your system. It's interesting. You brought up that story of Aim High. It was actually called CAMES at the time. To pan out a little bit on the background there. I was working with REMSA with Patrick Smith because they had just been given let me get my timing right. I know I had been involved in doing the benchmark survey that Aim High did, and then also it was right around the time that REMSA had been given one of the first innovation awards out of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation. And when they got the application, they could see that it was heavily built on the shoulders of the science of improvement work that had been done in healthcare. And so I was working with them to prepare their structure and their staff in order to be able to respond to that that grant, which was huge. And Patrick then introduced the ideas into Aim High and said, we should learn about this because this is where healthcare is going. And we said, what could we work on together? And we worked on, instead of picking a clinical process, people would go immediately to cardiac arrest or airway or something like that. Something that was really important was the reliability of being able to get to a call. And we picked fleet. Fleet maintenance and critical failure as an issue. That group that worked on it were all senior leaders. I mean, you were the chief operating officer, I think, at the time. I remember working with the CEO or the executive director of MEMS, and Patrick was on those calls, and Joe Penner from Charlotte was on the call. Everybody that was involved were senior leaders. And one of the things that we did is we stepped back and we looked at what's the system that we have. We changed definitions. I think prior to that, people were only looking at critical failures. And then we recognized there were actually a bunch of non-critical failures, but that were taking units out of service and causing lost unit hours. We looked at information and data in a way to see, is this system built to get the results that we want? Or is there actually something weird going on that we need to go investigate? And we began to really kind of pay attention to the broader picture of trying to break down a system, understand how it's working, understand whether that system's matching what we want it to do, and then how do we make changes from that. And to me, that's a key part of leadership. That's anytime that I'm going into an organization, I'm asking them, well, how are the things that you're responsible for performing towards your purpose? And then let's figure out, where do you want to act, either because something is got issues going on that you need to go investigate, or most commonly, you actually have a system that's built to get the results that you want to get, or I should say, built to get the results that you are getting, not necessarily what you want to get. And in order to get to a different result, you've got to change that system to get a better outcome. And quality improvement, by definition, involves you changing something to get a sustained result that is different than historical norms. So if any thing that you're doing that's not involving change or getting different results is not improvement. It's maybe some other function of quality, but improvement requires you to change to get a better result.
Well, I don't want us to come across as fleet nerds, Dave, but actually in the real world, of course, behind human employees, fleet is probably your next most expensive thing, and therefore investing time into it to make sure it's not going to cost you even more, then that's something to do. A final fleet story, if I may, that we realized that, again, vehicles going off to the dealerships to be fixed under warranty could take between 3 days and 2 weeks. And of course, that's a huge amount of downtime. And that's, of course, why we have the fleet ratio of having more trucks than you actually need in your peak of day, in order to make sure that trucks can go away for servicing. But if trucks spend so much time away, then you can't even maintain your peak of day. And so what we realized was, and this is Dan Fellows, the brilliant fleet manager in Richmond, and I got together and I told him the story of the tank pack. So when a tank breaks down, you don't tow the tank to the workshop, you bring the engine to the tank and you change the engine or the motor over. And so we actually, and because they were a Ford accredited workshop, we bought 3 Ford engines of the right mark to fit in the vehicle. And so rather than send the vehicle down to the workshop, down to the main dealer or whoever for 3 weeks, they spent 24 hours, changed the engine or the tank pack and put the truck back on the road. And our time spent lost in dealerships went to practically zero, because actually our guys could, and then we had a workshop and people would come around and visit and go, what's that in that room there? Well, that's the engine bay. What do you mean the engine bay? No, it's where we repair the engines and then put them back in the trucks, and we have spares, and people were blown away by that. But we had the level of sophistication and education and certification of our mechanics to do it. But actually that was buying 3 engines or motors, whatever the American word is, right? Actually, it was an investment in all of that downtime that was lost. And so, again, enough fleet nerdery, Dave. Let's move on to the actual structure of the content, unless you want to nerd out even more on fleet.
Well, not on fleet, but you said some things that I think are really important to quality. So one of the things you mentioned is that if you're looking from a leadership perspective at your organization, you notice where big chunks of your budget go. And you mentioned people and vehicles, and for some it might be facilities. So it makes sense from a leadership perspective that you'd want to have those things working at the best of their ability. Right. Second thing you mentioned is that if I am somebody who's running an emergency services organizations, one of my primary responsibilities every single day is when people call that we can respond and get there. And essential to that is the ability to have vehicles that are operating at a high level of performance. And so that is a key component of being able to whether you're focused on response time compliance or not, it's a key component of being able to get people to the site of an event. And so therefore it's a really central process that needs to be worked on. And so another reason why, when we think about what's important, we want to look at the things that support us in doing the core organizational activities. And then the third thing that you mentioned in there that's really critical is we could sit around and brainstorm or talk about the last time a vehicle broke down in my experience, or I'll tell you, I'm not a very maintenancely inclined person. So I know very, very little other than maybe there's a preventative maintenance strategy, or we got to get our oil changed, or use the right fuel or things like that. There are other people with expertise. But when we have an approach or a method like you were describing, where we can step back and say, hey, what's the process that we currently have? What's the data tell us about how that process is working? And then how do we change it to get a different result? That's part of what this program is embedding in leaders. And then there was another thing that you did, which is also to benchmark another place and say, how can we go look at another way that people do this, bring it into our way, and ask how could we trial or test that and see if that works. And that's a component of doing sort of master's level improvement. So your story about that one project shows a lot of what we're going to help people to learn how to do in this program.
Yeah, and for full disclosure, I was always a fleet nerd because in my military days, I commanded a unit of 27 armored vehicles. And if you've ever been in the military and you're listening to this and you've been an armored vehicle person, you know that they require more maintenance and TLC than your average family member. And so you've got to be on top of it the whole time, So anyway, that's enough of that. Let's move on to the actual course itself. So
Great.
This is a project-based 12-month program. So how is it structured? What are the inputs from the attendees? And of course, what are the takeaways before, during, middle, and after?
Great. Well, so the first thing you mentioned is it's project-based. So just like we were just talking about with Fleet, part of core of this program is that anybody that applies to it is going to come with a project that's important to their organization. Now, you might hear that and say, "Oh gosh, I've heard about other programs that are like that." And this is true. I think one thing that's strategically different is that Mike and I are going to work with the applicants to make sure that the project that they choose fits two kind of criteria. One is that this is a project that if you weren't taking this course, you'd have to work on anyway. This is going to be a thing that's related to the core practices and processes that matter in your organization. So I'll give you an example. Some of the ones that I'm working on right now with ambulance services in different parts of the world is, for example, like hospital turnaround, places that have boarding and real struggle of getting through the emergency department. That's a core process. It's really slowing them down. And when I was in the field, if it was 15 minutes for BLS and 30 minutes for ALS, these are places that are dealing with 4 hours. How do we fix that? Like here in the States, where people worked on things like ET3 and other programs that tried to reduce people going to the hospital, alternatives. I mentioned the program at REMSA. That's another effort where people are trying to figure out, how do I work on reducing the number of patients who are transported to the emergency department who don't need to go, to be treated in some other fashion, right? Maybe it's trying to figure out how to improve the cycle time and the reliability of our ability to assess patients and take care of them and decide who needs to go where. It could be around trying to figure out how to improve our first time submission of medical reimbursement, right? So these are people when they come into the program are going to actually apply with a handful of project ideas that they have. And what we're looking for is one, that it's something strategically important that you had to work on no matter what, that if you're working on this with your leadership team back home, they're going to be, it's going to be strategic for the organization. It's going to move the dots. It's going to move the ball. It's not extra. It's not competing with other stuff. It's something that really matters, something that came off your strategic plan or problem in practice that you're dealing with all the time. The second thing is we want to try to make sure that people are working on things that lend themselves to being able to use the tools and methods. So we tend to encourage people not to work on something that's really rare. That doesn't happen very often. We want people to be able to try stuff, make changes every day or every week, to be able to gather data. So if you're working on something that's happening all the time, then that's great. That is more useful. So people are going to apply with these ideas. Mike and I are going to help them try to hone in on one that meets those two quality characteristics, and it would be really useful in the course. And then they will use that as kind of the backbone of the program. So the program is 12 months in total duration. That's a blend of where we're going to meet online, on Zoom calls once a month. And then there are two very, very intensive workshop weeks that are going to be in Austin, Texas, where we're going to be at the ESO headquarters in their training facility, where we're going to kind of have a blend of classroom instruction, lots of simulation and practice, and then a lot of working on and refining these tools and methods applied to your project with a cohort of about 20 to 24 additional folks. So you're going to be working on this project all the way through. You're going to get instruction on the theories of the science of improvement, very specific tools and methods, and you'll apply them to your project, and be reporting back. What am I learning? What does my data show? Am I making improvement? And you'll be doing that throughout that 12-month period. And at the same time, you're going to be doing that with 23 other projects that are going on. So not only are you going to get to see your work, like let's say you're working on a fleet project or you're working on a reimbursement project, you'll get to learn deeply about your system, your particular project effort, and working with your team back home to try to change the results of that in the direction of goodness. And at the same time, you're going to be with 23 other leaders who are working on similar or different projects in their organizations, doing the same types of methods, but in different contexts. And you're going to be having to help them and coach each other to apply these tools and methods to get better at these projects. So you'll learn about your context and you'll learn about other people's contexts. So it's like a pretty big sort of learning experience. And like I said, it's that sort of mixed hybrid approach of online and in person, but over a 12-month period, with an aim that with an intent that each of these projects actually gets results. So if you do the work, and if you focus through and apply the tools and methods to your project at home, the aspiration is that you will take that project to results, and at the end, you will have solved a problem in your organization using these methods. You'll have something that you could potentially publish or do as a poster or share on something like EMS One, and you also have a skill set that enables you to tackle other problems back home. And you've just created a new colleague friend group of people that shared this experience and these tools and methods that you can also continue to collaborate with. So that's the kind of the course in a nutshell.
So the networking and creating new colleagues are clearly key. But before we go to the break, I'm going to make one point of something you said right at the start of that particular answer, and that the person that solves hospital turnover, hospital capacity and flow will A, make a fortune, and B, can get on the world circuit and talk about it, because it's a global issue. And I know you're working globally on this issue as well, but we'll talk about that after this break.
Lexipol empowers first responders and public servants to best meet the needs of their residents safely and responsibly. Serving more than 2 million public safety and government professionals in over 8,000 agencies and municipalities, Lexipol offers a range of solutions that includes policies, training, behavioral health resources, news and analysis, and grant assistance services for law enforcement, fire and rescue, EMS, local government, and other agencies dedicated to public safety. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com.
And we're back. And as always, thank you to my voiceover artist, Jim Dudley, who, of course, is the voice of Policing Matters over on Police One. And go over there, even if you're not in police. He has a lot of public safety discussions with some amazing guests. And I commend that if you need a podcast when you're driving from A to B, or indeed you're on the wall at the hospital, go and have a look and listen to Policing Matters. It's great. So please make sure also that you like and subscribe. And the beauty of EMS One-Stop and many of the other EMS One products is that we're all on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast. And we're also on YouTube, so you can listen to us, you can watch us, you can watch and listen. Of course, as I always tell people, the advantage of watching us on YouTube is that you get to see us, but also we put charts, graphs, and graphics in. So this is the webinar you never knew you were going to get, essentially. So please make sure that you do that. I'm talking to Dr. Dave Williams. We're talking about the new course that Dave and our good friend, your good friend, Mike Taigman, and others are leading for us, and there is a deadline coming up, which we'll talk about in a second. But coming back in, Dave, a great first half, some great discussion. We both got to get our fleet nerdery on, and I love that. But before I get into my sort of next leading question, just talk about the course dates and enrollment and deadlines, etc., if you wouldn't mind.
Right. So applications are open right now, and they run until I believe it's April 18th. And it's a real simple application. We have people go on, there's like a Google form, you answer some questions just about your experience, kind of what you're thinking, that you're available for the program. And then we're going to review those because, as I mentioned earlier, this course is designed for about 20 people. So we could create a bigger course, but we wouldn't be able to have the high touch and level of focus on individual projects and the cross coaching that happens. So the program is specifically designed for a very, very, very small cohort. And the program itself will begin online towards the end of the summer. And the first workshop is in September in Austin, which is a beautiful time to be here. And then again, the second workshop will be in 2026 in February, which doesn't sound like it would be a great time, but while most people are experiencing snow and terrible weather, it's pretty nice here. So it's also going to be in Austin. And then the rest will be monthly webinars that are mostly around talking and hearing from people about their projects. So they're lots of monthly learning and deep dives in those two face-to-face workshops.
Excellent. So as I just mentioned, you can listen to us or you can watch us. And of course, one of the challenges, I always place this upon my guests, is if you're going to talk about something that we're putting on the screen on YouTube, you need to be extra special and extra good at describing what we're looking at. So for those that are watching and watching on Apple Podcasts, can pick up on what we're talking about. So, of course, one of the key things that I know you are a great exponent of is using the images of the data you've gathered to tell the story. In other words, the charts, the graphs, and the tools, right? So one of the things that you're gonna master on the course is the use of a lot of these tools. So in classic Dave Williams style, take us through some of the things that the students will get to learn about, get to employ, and then get to use them as part of their, producing their own evidence and their own documents, papers, etc. at the end.
Yeah, well, one of the things that is really central to the science of improvement is about our ability to understand variation. And if you're not a math person or you're not into statistics, sometimes that doesn't sound very sexy, but it's been said, one of the gurus of statistics often said if there was an ability to learn one thing, it's about how to understand and fix variation. My colleague and friend, Dr. Don Berwick, who was one of the founders of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, wrote a fantastic paper many years ago. It's older probably than most of your audience, but one of the things he talked about was this idea in healthcare that he described as intended variation versus unintended variation. Right. So intended variation is the stuff that we talk about all the time, where we decide to deviate the way that we practice in order to meet the needs of our patients or our clients or a particular circumstance. Right. We want to be able to do that. We always want to be able to adapt what we do for the people that need it, and not just give like a cookbook or a rigid approach to every person, because stuff is different. Right. Unintended variation is when we have a situation where people are having different experiences, or we're getting different outcomes, and it's not in a planned way. It's not because we chose that, it's because the system's designed that way. Now, you were asking, and I think it's really fair, a lot of times when people think about making a big investment in a course like this, or they're asking, why should I try to learn something new? One of the, they want to know what's the return on investment I get? What is the value for me as a leadership team if I send a leader to this program in Austin? And one way I did that I looked at that, is I went and plucked a series of different charts that I found in various sources, and some of them are from the peer-reviewed literature. Some of them are from like governmental sources, like the GAO here in the States. Some of them were from benchmark projects like Aim High and the comparison. And what I wanted to show in each of these, and ironically, to your point, Rob, they use different charts and tools that we learn how to use in a sophisticated way. There's examples, for example, the first chart I'm going to talk about is the GAO chart, which talks about ambulance costs and uses what's known as a histogram. There are charts around aspirin administration in the NHS England ambulance trusts that uses a kind of a funnel plot that helps us to learn not only about the variation across the systems, but also about the volume of the patients that they see. There's a chart about intubation success that's a scatter plot that shows you the relationship. This was done by folks at ESO and published in Emergency Medicine about the volume of intubation opportunities that you have versus the success rates, right? And there are just some simple comparison bar charts that come from Aim High, and then I'll get into the cardiac arrest ones in a second. But let me just walk you through real quick. As we think about these charts, the first one I mentioned was the GAO chart. This is an old chart, but it actually is a histogram of self-reported cost of delivering ambulance service. And as you notice in the chart, if you're looking at it, there's a spread from $200 of transport to $1,500 of transport, and there's the curve is between 200 and 900. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons that go into here, but let me ask you: if you just thought, like, if you're a citizen on the street, does it make sense that there's a difference of almost $1,000 in the cost of ambulance service that's logical and intended? Some of it may be for various reasons, like subsidy and or it's volunteer versus public versus private. There's all kinds of good reasons, but there's not a good reason why there's such a dramatic spread, right? When we look at the NHS England aspirin administration, this is a funnel plot where they basically this was in part of looking at how to improve STEMI care. They compared the aspirin administration rates across NHS trusts in England. So I think there's like 10 different NHS trusts that were in this particular pool. And
so let me just explain to those listening in the US that in the UK, there are a number of regional ambulance services. They are governmental, if you want to describe it as that, and their title. So they're not ambulance companies, they're not ambulance organizations. They are known as trusts. So that's
Yeah.
that, just to explain the kind of, so people are thinking, what is this, like a
You
trust
say
fund?
like
Or?
departments or
Yeah, so is it,
you know, different
a
communities.
regional department. The UK and Australia both have geographically identified regional ambulance services. Sorry, do carry on,
Yeah.
Dave.
No, and so you can imagine, just like here in the States or anywhere, each of these organizations wants to take care of STEMI patients really well. They're probably familiar with the evidence. They probably have pretty similar protocols. But when we look at now, one thing that differed, and this is where a funnel plot comes in, is that they have different volumes of patients. Some are more urban, some of them are more rural or suburban. But as you look at this chart, you actually see that there's variation from 50% success to 100% success in delivering aspirin administration to STEMI patients. That variation from place to place is unintended. There's probably different reasons and situations in each of those trusts that contributes to their number. But the variation that exists across trusts is not intended. It's built into the system and opportunities for improvement. The scatter plot of intubation success that I mentioned, this is looking at the volume. The theory here was if my volume of intubation opportunities is higher, does that increase my success? And what you see on the chart looks like a shotgun.
I was trying to think of the analogy there for when you look at a scatter plot, and it's like someone's just fired buckshot into your chart.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Now, one of the things that's interesting is that actually most of the places are pretty much clustered in somewhere around one, maybe two intubations per 100 responses. What now? So the opportunities are pretty similar. There are some that have higher levels of opportunities, but most of it is clustered. Most of the buckshot is clustered in that, say, 1 to 2 zone. If you look at the y-axis, which covers the percentage of intubation success, the variation runs from 20% success to 100% success. And there is this broad, like most of the dots are probably between 60 and 100%, right? So there's a huge amount of variation for the success of this procedure, even amongst organizations that have the same opportunity to learn. So this, to me, this is not about, are these difficult patients or are they these unique situations? This is about the fact that these organizations have different approaches or processes in the way that they do stuff. But they may not have a method or a way in which they can reduce that variation and get better at what they're doing. I included a couple charts. You mentioned fleet. We won't cover that too much because we've already done that justice. But there's a bar chart that compares different organizations that are part of the AIM High group and their different vehicle failures per 100,000 miles. Now, when you say per 100,000 miles, you're creating a standardized rate, which makes the metric similar across these. They also theoretically are using a similar definition to define it, but the rate of vehicle failures is anywhere from like 1 per 100,000 miles to almost 6 per 100,000 miles. Now, these are all high-performing organizations. There may be various reasons. You mentioned they might have picked a vendor that has a significant number of problems. They might have distance differences. There's all kinds of other factors that may go into it. But it is a little striking that across these very high-performing organizations, you have a significant variation in the number of vehicle failures that represents an opportunity for improvement.
Let me ask a general question before you go on then. So you started off this discussion way back when by talking about the key is to spot the variation. And actually in everything you've described, and if you're watching everything you can see there's an outlier there. There is that one where you want to go, ha. But what do we do with the ha moment? I can see that if you're an organization that has 3 times as many vehicle failures per 100,000 miles, what should the chief, the leader, the responsible person then do armed with this information?
So great question. So one of the things when you're and benchmarking has been around for decades in the ambulance space, and there's a theory about benchmarking, right? One is I want to know kind of where I stand against other peers, but that's about where the value of it ends, right? Then the next thing, and the next question should be, well, who is doing a better level of performance, and how do I learn from them, right? And we need a method to be able to go learn. One of the things that's fascinating about this, and I'll take you to this slide here of cardiac arrest registry data. I looked at one of the most established registries of clinical care in the U.S., and that's the CARES database, Cardiac Arrest Registry to Advance Survival. And they put out a report, and on the right side of this slide I'm sharing with you is a benchmark comparison, a static number for a year of all of the communities that submit their data on cardiac arrest survival into the CARES database, and they're compared. And if you look at the middle one, which is the Utstein survival rate, the range is from 0% survival. So this means that there are communities that are actually reporting that don't ever get anybody who live when they're treated by the EMS system, who have the highest potential for survival, all the way up to almost 61%. And that's King County, Washington, where if your heart stops in front of somebody and the first rhythm is ventricular fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia, then in downtown Seattle, let's say, you have a 61% chance of survival, right? And that data has been known for ages, right? So now the middle of that data is at about 30%. So across all these communities that are submitting data and care about cardiac arrest, they're only getting to about 30%. But yet we know that there is the potential to get 60%. And the best practice in the industry has been documenting the heck out of this for decades, right? Now, what you can't see is on the left-hand side, I then took these data and I looked at the average over time, and I put them on Schuhart statistical process control charts. And so for the Utstein average, the average has been about 31% for 10 years, and it's not gotten any better. The only change that exists in the data is during the COVID years when survival went down. So we have an attributable reason that COVID influenced survival rates in communities. Now, if you look at the best practice, the average is 60.9%. So the average over 10 years across this cohort of people that have been working on cardiac arrest is 31.8%, just under 32%, and it has not gotten better. And the average we know is possible is twice that, right? So now part of what we would think to do then is that we should go out and learn about what Seattle does and figure out how to replicate their stuff. And Seattle, man, they have been very, very transparent about how they do their stuff. They do a resuscitation academy. They publish all this information. They're in peer-reviewed journals. They've got decades of history. And one of the things that is interesting, if you think about this, so what we want to do is go out and study the best practice and figure out how to learn from them and change our results. And one example of that I often talk about is Mecklenburg County EMS agency, or Mecklenburg EMS agency in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the surrounding metro area. I was actually a paramedic there in the 1900s when Joe Penner started. They also have worked on quality as an organizational strategy for years. They've sent several people, including Joe Penner and Dr. John Studnick, who's now leading Wake County, to the program that I teach at IHI, the Improvement Advisor Professional Development Program. They had a desire to improve their cardiac arrest survival rates. And a number of years ago, their average rate was not that much different than the average of the CARES database. It was better than. They've been working on it really hard, but they weren't getting anything near Seattle's. So they went out and they went to the Resuscitation Academy. They went and studied with the we would call the pros from Dover. They learned all these things, and then they brought them home. And actually, there's a great paper that Dr. Studnick wrote in GEMS called "Translating Science into Practice," where he talks about how it wasn't good enough to go just study what somebody else did, even though they were totally awesome at their performance. That they needed methods to be able to translate and adapt that to their home community. And so, in his paper, he goes through a series of different discussions about how, for example, like he learned about role-based activities and pit crew and things like that. And they tried to do that, and that wasn't good enough. They didn't see advancements in their performance. He talks about how like the Utstein template provided interesting information about data to track, to understand, and create a registry around improvement. But it didn't include the important process measures, the things that they needed to do reliably in order to get a good outcome. Things like compression depth and the rate of compression and being consistent, or the time to defibrillation, or the flow time. And so they had to actually create those measures, and they started tracking those measures using Shewhart statistical process control charts. And they then did a series of PDSA tests, plan, do, study, act tests, little experiments, where in simulation they brought crews together and they said, if these are the things that have to happen in order to improve survival, how do we get really good at these? And they tested how they trained people, how the people applied that training. They tested like how fatigued people got, and they basically had to figure out, how do I adapt what Seattle has learned to Charlotte? And they use the science of improvement and the tools and methods that we teach to really break down and study and enhance the quality of their care. When they did that, I want to say it was less than 5 years, they watched their survival rate go from just above the CARES average to matching the near what Seattle was producing, and they sustained that for going into the future, which is our definition of improvement. So not only did they get a little bit better, they got significantly better. They got their survival rate to above 50%, and they were able to sustain it over time. And they included their data in the paper. This is the kind of thing that we're talking about in terms of next level improvement. It's what you described, Rob, in terms of somebody tells me that they're a best practice. I learned somebody's really good at community paramedics. I learned somebody that says that they've created amazing outcomes with blood products. I've learned that there's an organization that's reduced their wall time, and now I go out there and I want to try to figure out what it is that they do, extract the key drivers, bring it home, and create a project or an effort that helps me test and adapt what they think they've got, and try and be able to show measurable results. And this is something that the other charts show is a difficult area in ambulance service in the States and worldwide, where there's wide unintended variation. There may be best practices, but we have a hard time extracting what the heck that best practice does, or it's not well documented, it's not published, it's not in the peer-reviewed literature like you would find in healthcare. And now we've got to try to figure out, how do I take what they think they're doing, bring it home, figure out what the heck we're doing, and try to test and adapt those, and then have a way to actually show that we're getting results. And then when we get them, sustain them, hold them in place. And that's something that I think is unique about what we're trying to bring to the space through this program.
Excellent. You've given us a sort of a well-rounded, not only we talked about the class, but obviously we've started to really get into, some of those practical aspects. Just to kind of round off some of the things you talked about there, of course, the CARES database, the great work being done by Medic One in Seattle, is the Resuscitation Academy. There are now resuscitation academies, plural, and more. Think of a word that's more than more around the country. My work colleague, Hilary Gates, of course, is now leading the 6 Minutes to Live movement, where we're talking about the fact of, you mentioned these folk within CARES are doing this. That's just a cohort of organizations, not the whole country. So in other words, we've got to take that best practice which results from the research and the analysis and scale it across the country. And so therefore there's another good reason to come and see you, Mike, and the team and do this class as well. We're getting near the end, Dave. I'm going to sort of come to my final question in a second, but obviously there is a cost here. And
Sure.
Let's get that sort of elephant out in the room. Yes, there is a cost, but obviously from what I've just heard you say, there's a fantastic ROI in actually getting involved with this program.
Well, let's talk about that. So one of the things we did when we benchmarked this program in the space is we looked at what were other professional development programs, and the course cost is $5,000 per person. And that doesn't include travel and some other expenses. So it's not cheap. It is on par with other deep dive professional development experiences in the ambulance space, other courses. Where now I will tell you the program that I do that is a little bit more advanced than this one, but is targeted at healthcare, is $16,000 per year. So it's about a third of what healthcare organizations invest for an advanced program. The other thing that I would add in there is that, and I think I'm really grateful for you for kind of thinking about the way that we choose our language. Is we talked earlier that the projects that are going to be worked on in this course, or while you're in this course, are things that you have already committed or are already in need of getting results on back home, that are tied to things that are in the core business or practice of everyday stuff. So whether you come to this course or not, you're still going to be pursuing these efforts, and they're important, right? So if you bring them into this program, you're going to get not only new ways and methods to work on this, you're going to get the coaching and support of Mike Taigman and I, and you're going to get the benefit of coaching from your 20 plus other senior leaders that are also working on projects and going through this journey together. You're also going to be exposed to other projects that are going to be ones that you might need to work on later. So there's a lot of benefit. I usually make the case to folks that you should think about how much the program will cost you to attend, and then what it would take within your project in order to achieve that ROI just in the project. In most cases, if I solve that fleet program or problem, or I reduce lost unit hours, making up $5,000 or $7,000 in a project is actually pretty easy, and it can be useful to make that business case as part of thinking about your project. So I would agree. It is a heavy investment. I also would agree it's the return in terms of both the actual project results that you get and the skills and ability that you walk away with, that you get to immediately apply to other problems in practice and become a problem solver and a results-driven leader. I think make it a sound investment. And I think obviously that's something that leadership teams need to figure out. And figure out whether that's something they have the ability to do. We promise that if everyone that makes the commitment to be part of this program and is accepted will not flinch at the end of the year at what they got out of it.
Let's talk EMS currency here. Help me, and this is my way of translating that for people and chiefs listening. This course is going to cost you less than 50 unit hours, and this course will probably save you a lot more. So there you go. There's the ROI. And with that, my final question I ask everybody, Dave, is there anything I've forgotten to ask or anything you need to tell us?
That's a great question. I think we've really covered a great deal. I mean, I'll go back to, I think a thing that I'm constantly reinforcing is that the ambulance industry has a lot of opportunity for improvement. We've seen that in terms of talking about the variation that exists. We know that in terms of the fact that I use the old reference of who moved my cheese, that things are changing in the landscape of our environments. But the system was designed for 1960s, 1970s need, and that the need of emergency services today is very different. And we need ways in which we can make changes to the system and get better results. This worldwide, there remains kind of a thinking that improvement science or quality is something that I apply to some of my problems, or it's something that I have, a function or department to do. We're making the case that creating results and creating good quality is the leadership team's responsibility, and everybody should have some degree of knowledge in how to do that. And this course is aimed at creating that. There isn't anything like this in the ambulance space worldwide. There's not a single program where it blends the rigor and methods that of the science of improvement that you would get in healthcare or in industry, and also translates it specifically to emergency service organizations and a lot of ambulance service examples and approaches. So it's completely unique in its space. And I think the caliber of people that are going to come to it are really strong, and a great cohort to be part of. And I think they're going to make a real impact on the profession in a short amount of time. And I really think that's exciting. So I'm excited to be part of the program. I'm excited to partner with Mike Taigman, whose fault it is that I have done a lot of things in my career, including getting into quality.
He's to blame for a lot of things, let me tell you.
He's to blame for quite a number of things that I've been engaged in, and I'm excited to bring this level of problem solving and results orientation into the ambulance space. And I'm grateful to you and to EMS One for helping us tell folks about it.
Indeed, and there is a press release on EMS One, and all of that will be in the show notes, as will many of the things that we've talked about today. So, Dave, for the moment, sir, thank you very much indeed. As always, it's been a pleasure having you on, and maybe in 8-9 months you can come back and let us know how it's going.
Well, great. In 8 or 9 months, what I'd like to do is bring the leaders who are in the course back to talk about the outcomes of their projects.
Let's have let's have them on, and let's talk about the absolute results from the course. Good idea. I'm going to hold you to that.
Great.
Okay, so that was my good friend, our good friend, Dr. Dave Williams, who is partaking or leading this course along with the one and only Taigman. Remember, the key dates, the application deadline is April the 18th, 2025. The program start is July the 22nd, 2025, with in-person workshops in September of this year and February of next year in the quite nice weather of Austin, Texas, and the course completion will be by December 2026. So that's the course. That was Dave Williams. This has been another edition of EMS One-Stop. Please make sure that you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I've been Rob Lawrence, and until next time, bye for now.